So I want to thank everybody for tuning in to our podcast, for checking out our previous episodes. Today, we have a very special guest here on the podcast, Gary Wolf. He is the author of Who Censored Roger Rabbit, which adapted into a full feature-length film, Who Framed Roger Rabbit. But before we get started, I just want to throw out there, check us out on Facebook if you've not already done so, at The Shadows Podcast. And then also on Instagram, go over there, follow us, _shadows_podcast. So today I am Batistaless. He is not with us today. He is off teaching. So it's going to be just myself here conducting this interview with Mr. Wolf, which I am super honored to have on here. He was born January 24th, 1941 in Earlville, Illinois. He is a graduate from University of Illinois at, is it Urbana, Champaign-Urbana.
Chambana.
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 He served as a captain in the United States Air Force. He authored, as we said, Who Censored Roger Rabbit, and that got turned into a multi-million-dollar film. Sir, thank you very much for joining us here for Shadows Podcast.
My great pleasure. Happy to do it.
So before we get started, I'm going to have a couple of little rapid-fire questions for you.
Yeah, sure.
First one, favorite ride at Disney?
Oh, Roger Rabbit's Cartoon Spin. What else?
Okay, there you go. I was so heartbroken when I found out it's not at Disney World. I think it's still at Disneyland.
Disneyland, yeah. And when they rapid fire response, but slow response here, when they did Mickey's Toontown, Roger's Toontown, and that whole thing, they brought me in as a consultant. And if you go out there and see it, you will notice there are no right angles. No right angle lines. Everything is at a different angle. So all the roofs are different angles.
Mailboxes.
And as you're walking through it, it's really kind of like walking through my imagination. There are little hidden gags, like when you go to the manhole cover and you stand on the manhole cover, and if you tap the manhole cover a certain way, you can hear the weasels underneath in the sewers plotting about how they're going to kidnap Jessica. And if you go into the post office, you'll see mailboxes for Mickey, Donald, Roger, Goofy. And if you press the knob on the mailbox, that character will talk to you. Right? And if you're in Minnie's house and you're walking out of Minnie's house through the back door, you'll see draped over her easy chair a magazine that's called Jessica's Secret, and it's like a Victoria's Secret, except right. Jessica's on the cover wearing a negligee. And as you're going out the door of Minnie's house, if you turn around and look at her bookcase, you'll see a copy of my book. Right? Yeah,
that's pretty cool.
Yeah. So now I've slowed down your rat-a-tat.
No, I'm thinking, wow, I walked by every single one of them. Now I'm going to be sitting there stomping on the sewer lid trying to get the weasels to speak. Okay, next one. Favorite cartoon that was not in the Roger Rabbit film?
Red Hot Riding Hood. Tex Avery character from the 1930s and 40s. And Tex Avery, it was just a brilliant cartoonist. Kind of a wackadoodle, but a lot of cartoonists are. And he came up with this character called Red Hot Riding Hood. Redhead, dancer in a club. And she was always being pursued by this creature, Wolfie, a wolf. And the wolf was always wearing a tuxedo. And there's a cartoon, I think it's called Wild and Wolfie. And there's another one called Swing Shift Cinderella. And if you look at either one of them, because he used the same scene, if you look at either one of them, you will see that Red Hot Riding Hood, who is redheaded, has a wasp waist and protuberances, does a musical number, which is basically the same musical number that Jessica Rabbit does.
Right.
And when I created Jessica Rabbit, my influences were Red Hot Riding Hood, a movie star from the 40s called Veronica Lake. Probably don't know her, but You should take a look at some of her old movies. She was a movie siren, and she wore her hair across one eye. All right, she had long blonde hair, wore it across one eye, and it was really sexy, really hot look for the day. And so other women of the era copied her and started wearing their hair across one eye. Well, when World War II came and women went to work in the factories instead of men, they were having all kinds of accidents because they had hair across one eye. They were working one-eyed. So Veronica Lake, as a patriotic gesture, cut her hair. And so all the women in the United States cut their hair too. But the other character I based Jessica on was Oddly Tinkerbell. And I saw Jessica as kind of Tinkerbell, all grown up and funky. And when I met Mark Davis was one of the Disney 9 old men. I mean, he did Snow White. I mean, he goes way back. He did Snow White and he did the Wicked Queen, and it just goes way back. Wonderful animator. But he also did Tinkerbell. And when he did Tinkerbell, Marilyn Monroe modeled for him so that he could get Tinkerbell. And she came in and modeled for him nude. So you've got Marilyn Monroe, nude, Tinkerbell, and Jessica Rabbit. So it's like, it's like a progression there,
Yeah. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Favorite line from the movie?
I guess I got a 30-year-old lust and a 3-year-old dinky.
See, it's usually I hear either that one or the Jessica Rabbit. I was drawn that way.
I'm not bad. I'm just drawn that way. But that's that line. Both lines are really good ones, and I was really happy coming up with those. I'll probably never come up with anything nearly that good.
They're both in the book too.
Yeah, they're in the book. Both of them are in the book. But of the two, the 30-year-old lust and 3-year-old dinky just says so much about that character.
Yeah.
And it's just so funny to think about. Baby Herman, I consider to be my most successful character.
Yeah.
There were a lot of adult baby characters in cartoons and in the comic books and comic strips back in the 30s and 40s. There was Baby Huey and tons of them. They were like adult babies. And so I came up with Baby Herman. And when I turned the manuscript into my agent, he said, "Oh, you can't use that character." And I said, "Why not?" He said, "Well, that's not your character." I said, "Yeah, it is." He says, "No, I've seen this character in other cartoons. You didn't come up with this, somebody else." I said, No. So he was so successful that my own agent didn't believe that I created him. So I think yeah.
I liked in the book how he had like a human butler that worked for him, and he had this huge palace. The line I actually like, I know it's not politically correct, but the one where it's Donald and Daffy having the duel at the club with the pianos, and Daffy says, "That's the last time I work with someone with a speech impediment." I don't know why. I always laugh every.
And I'll tell you where that one came from. I didn't come up with that. One of the animators came up with it. But when we were creating the look of Jessica, Roger, Baby Herman, because I'm a writer and I kind of see what they look like in my head, but it's a book, right? And so when we were creating the characters, Dick Williams was the lead animator, and he worked with me to create the look of the characters. Baby Herman was pretty easy because he's based on kind of big adult babies, and we just made him littler. He was kind of easy. Jessica was Red Hot Riding Hood, pretty easy. Roger in the book is a brown rabbit.
Yeah,
and
it's like 6 foot.
Yeah, and Dick Williams thought that he would look better on screen as a white rabbit.
Mm-hmm.
That he would stand out more as a white rabbit than as a brown rabbit. And I didn't have any problem with brown rabbit, white rabbit, so we made him a white rabbit. The rest of his clothes pretty much the same: red overalls, polka dot tie, big floppy ears. The orange top knot. Everything else pretty much the same. But again, I'm a writer, and I wrote what he said, but I never heard him speak. And so that's where a guy named Charlie Fleischer got involved. And we heard Charlie Fleischer doing a bit in a comedy club where he was doing Donald Duck having an orgasm, right? and we heard that and said, there's our guy, right? So we brought Charlie in, and Charlie worked with me and with Dick Williams to give Roger his voice. And, Charlie came up with the voice, and after 50 different voices, but he came up with the voice. But Dick Williams said, we need something else. He said, every successful cartoon character has a speech impediment. And, Daffy Duck, Donald Duck, Porky Pig, they all have speech impediments. So Charlie was looking around for some speech impediment that hadn't already been used. Everybody's used the stutter, and it couldn't make him Donald Duck because nobody would be able to understand him. So Charlie came up with, how about if he stutters when he says, please, like, please. And, he did it a couple of times, and we said, yeah, that's good. Yeah, do that. So speech impediments, politically incorrect, but running through the movie.
Yeah. Like I said, I laugh every single time I hear that one. So tell us about your upbringings.
Sure. I grew up in a little farm town in Illinois called Earlville, 1,400 people. My dad ran the pool hall there. My mother worked in the school cafeteria. And actually, Earlville had and my parents had a lot to do with where I eventually wound up and what I eventually wound up doing. And it starts when I was in the second grade, I think. And my teacher gave the class a picture to color. And the whole point of the exercise was to color the picture and stay inside the lines.
Right.
Don't go outside the lines, stay inside the lines. So I took the picture home and started coloring it in. And I wasn't worried about this because I was as good at staying inside the lines as anybody. Nobody could stay inside the lines better than I could. So I looked at that picture, and it was a picture of a farm. There was a farmhouse, a barn, there was a meadow, and there was a cow out in the middle of the field, one cow. So I colored the barn red because that's what color barns are, and I colored the farmhouse yellow because that's the color the farmhouses were around Earlville. Colored the meadow green, and then I came to that cow. And my mother had always told me, she said, when people are alone, they get sad, they get lonely, and they get blue. Yeah, true for people, must be true for cows. So I colored that cow blue. And the next day I hand that paper in. The day after that, the teacher passes all those papers back except for mine. And she says, Gary, you come up here to the front of the class. Man, I stayed inside the lines better than anybody. So I go up to the front of the class, and I'm standing there, and she puts that picture up over my head so the class can see it. And she says, class, just look at this stupid, stupid picture. She said, everybody knows that cows are brown, cows are black, cows are white. Sometimes cows are brown, black, and white all together. Never, never, never are cows blue. She says, Gary, don't you ever do anything like that again. She called my mother. My mother had to go to school, which was a seriously big deal.
Yeah.
And the teacher said, I think there's something wrong with Gary. So that night, my mother, just before dinner, my mother and my father called me into the living room and they sat me down. And my mother said, Gary, why did you do that? Why did you color that cow blue? And I said, Ma, it was you. It was really you. You told me people sound lonely. They're blue. Cows sound lonely. Yeah. Color the cow blue. She says, oh, okay. She says, you go outside and play for a while. Your father and I have to talk about this. Well, like I told you, my father ran a pool hall and my mother worked in the school cafeteria. My father, they were children of the Depression. My father had dropped out of school in the 3rd grade, right? My mother dropped out of school in the 8th grade. They had to go to work. And they were not what you'd call upscale urban liberals, right? And I did not think this was going to have a happy ending. So after about 15 minutes, my mother came out and says, Gary, come back in. She says, all right, Gary, your father and I talked about this. And we decided that the next time you want to color a cow blue, you go ahead and color a cow blue, right? She called my teacher and said, the next time Gary wants to color a cow blue, just let him. So, it was the very first time that anybody had kind of validated my creativity.
Yeah.
And I've still got that picture around somewhere in my files. So a couple of weeks later, the same teacher gave us an assignment. We had to write about what we did on our summer vacation, right? So all the kids wrote about going to Wisconsin or, wherever. And I wrote about how I went out in my backyard and I used tin cans and aluminum foil to make a rocket, which I then used to fly to the moon. And my poor teacher just gave it back and said, well, that was interesting. And so, it went on from there. At the other thing that my parents gave me, my mother always told me, she said, if you want to get out of this town, you don't want to wind up living here the rest of your life and running your father's pool hall. She said, the one thing you can do to make that happen is to read. And, but good mother that she was, she never put any restrictions on what I could read, anything, as long as I read. So, what did I read? Well, what do kids read? I read comic books. I used to blow through comic books. I used to go down to the B Street Smoke Shop, which was run by a guy named Andy Giles. And I would hang out there and I would read all the comics I could before he threw me out. And then I'd buy whatever I could afford with my allowance and I'd trade them with other kids for other comics. And I read comic books. And then my dad, who, he wasn't a big reader, but he did like to read. And what he read were true crime magazines. And these things were printed in the 40s and 50s. And they featured stories of true crimes. They weren't fiction, they were true crimes. And photographers would go to crime scenes and take pictures of dead bodies, people that had been killed, shot, whatever. If you ever saw the movie Road to Perdition with Tom Hanks, Jude Law played one of those photographers. Mm-hmm. And that's what my dad read. And so, they were laying all over the house and I would read them. And my mother never said, hey, don't read those, they'll rot your brain. As long as I was reading, she was fine with that. So, luckily I graduated to a better quality of crime fiction, noir mysteries, Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett and the like. And that's what I grew up reading and that's what I grew up loving. And so when it came time to write the novel that eventually became Roger Rabbit, I had already written 3 science fiction novels, really well received. Doubleday gave me a contract for 4 science fiction novels. I never had a reject. I mean, they bought the first novel I wrote, gave me a contract for 3 more. So I had a 4-book deal. And I turned in the first 3, and on the 4th one, I wanted to write something that would combine my love of comic books, cartoons, comic strips, and noir fiction, detectives. And I'm trying to think, it's a hard couple of concepts to put together. How do you put those two together? So I was trying to think about it, and I was watching Saturday morning cartoons just for research. I told my wife, just purely for research.
Of course.
I got fascinated, not with the cartoons, which were pretty simplistic and not at all as good as, the ones I remember from my childhood, but I got fascinated with the commercials, which was Captain Crunch and the Tricks
Tony the
Rabbit,
Tiger,
Snap, Crackle, and Pop, and Tony the Tiger. Yeah. And these were cartoon characters talking to real kids, and nobody seemed to think that was odd. And I said, wow, what a great world that would be. What an interesting world that would be if cartoon characters were real. What kind of a world would that be? So I spent a year just researching the conventions of cartoons and comic strips and what they did that people didn't do, and how that would affect a real world. And and then I came up with a mystery that can only exist in a world where cartoon characters were real. I came up with Eddie Valiant, my hard-boiled private eye. I named him after my father, Eddie, and wrote the novel. And clearly the best thing I'd ever written. Maybe the best thing anybody ever wrote. It was really good. So he sent it to Doubleday, and first time in my career, they rejected it. I got a reject, and so I called my editor and I said, Sharon, I said, why did you reject this? She said, this is the best thing. This is the best work I've ever produced. I mean, this is great. She says, yeah, I agree. She says, it's funny. It's unusual. Never been anything like this before. And that's the problem. It's so unusual that I had to send it over to the marketing department, get them to buy off on it. And they were the ones who rejected it. So I called the head of the marketing department and said, hey, Charles, I said, why did you reject my novel? And he said, well, I really thought it was funny, but he said, there's no category for it in the bookstores. It's not a regular mystery. It's not science fiction. It's not a children's book. It's not regular fiction. There's nothing. We got no category for it. We can't sell this book. So I said, well, what would you do if somebody brought you The Wizard of Oz or Alice in Wonderland or Gulliver's Travels? What would you do with those? And he thought for a minute. He says, I couldn't sell those either. So I said, well, okay. So I called my agent and I said, Bill, I said, if I can't sell this, I don't want to be a writer, because this is what I want to write. I don't, he said, no, don't worry about it. We'll find out for it. So he started sending it to other publishers, other editors at the same publisher. And along the way, he got 110 rejects. 110 editors, companies rejected that novel, always for the same reason. Editors loved it. Marketing department said, we can't sell it. And so I back in those days, rejects were letters. Today, rejects are emails,
or text or something.
Yeah, or text or something. But back in those days, they came to you in the mailbox. And my wife used to call me going out to the mailbox every day, the daily disappointments, because I'd come back with, a fistful of reject letters. And finally, the book landed on the desk of a woman at St. Martin's Press, Rebecca Martin. And she had just published a big bestseller for them. And so the owner of the company told her, he said, Rebecca, as a thank you, you can do a vanity project. Whatever book you want to publish, I'll publish it, whatever. Just let me know. So just at that time, my book came across her desk. She saw it and said, this is it. So she went to the publisher and said, hey, I found the book I want to publish. This is it. He said, all right, let me read it. So He took it home that night, read it, came back the next day and said to her, Rebecca, he said, I told you could publish any book you wanted, but you can't publish this because I can't sell it. And Rebecca stepped up to the plate and says, well, either you publish it or I quit. So they published it, but a very small quantities. I think 5,000 copies, which is, next to nothing. And if I could change one thing in my writing career, if I could go back in the past
right.
and do one thing differently, I would go back in the past and I would buy all 5,000 of those books because they sold for like $2.95. And today, if you find them on eBay, they're around $375.
Yeah.
So it's better than buying IBM at 25 cents. I mean, it was really great. So the book got published, but before it got published, it took about a year. They bought it, and then it came out a year later. So they bought it in 80. It came out in 81. In that 1980-81 time frame, I get this call at home, and guy on the other end of the phone says, "Is this Gary K. Wolf?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "Hey, this is Roy Disney from the Disney Company." I said, "Yeah, Roy Disney calling me at home, right? Give me a break." He says, "No, really, Roy Disney." He says, "Yeah, one of my friends, having me on." He says, No, Roy Disney, and we want to buy your book. And we wondered if you'd be interested in letting us make it into a movie. I said, "Yeah, right," because the book hasn't come out yet. But somebody at St. Martin's sent a manuscript copy to Disney saying, "Hey, we think you'd like this." I never found out who. And I tried because I wanted to kiss her or him full on the lips. It was so nice. Anyway, made its way up to Roy Disney. And Roy Disney said, "Of course, of course we want to make this into a movie." They needed Roger Rabbit in those days. They were making movies about nutty professors and flubber.
It's kind of when they were struggling a little.
Yeah,
early 80s.
And the black hole and the black cauldron, which disappeared down the black hole. They had been offered E.T. and they turned it down.
Yeah.
They had been offered Star Wars and they turned it down. So they really needed something that was going to make them a factor in the movie industry again. And they saw this as being that. This was it. So, if you've read the book, and everybody should read the book, it's different from the movie. And I did not think that there was any way they could make that book into a movie.
If you read it, it's hard to imagine it becoming a Disney movie.
It's hard to imagine becoming a movie because that's the difference between books and movies. A book is something that requires a reader to use imagination. Yep. You read it and you shut your eyes and you see it, and it's you. It's whatever you come up with. A movie is right out there on the screen, and it's up there and it's big and it's there, and it's easier to do fantastical things in a book because people can imagine it.
Right.
It gets really hard when you have to take a fantastical thing and show it to somebody because it's just hard. And, in those days, this was 1981, 82, 83, 84. Disney didn't really have the technology to do this. They did not really have the technology to do live action animation and make it look real. They didn't have that. So there was a time when they came to me and they said, "Look, we're having a lot of trouble doing cartoon characters and real people together. How about, what would you think if we had the cartoon characters be characters in costume like they are at Disneyland instead of cartoon characters?" And all of a sudden I'm thinking, oh man, I'm going to have Fred McMurray as Eddie Valiant, and Dean Jones as the rabbit, Haley Mills as Jessica, and Kurt Russell as Baby Herman. I said, don't you think that's a little off the premise? It compromises the premise just a little bit. And, they said, yeah, you're right. So they went on. But they might not ever have gotten it right, except in '85. Roy Disney was kind of forced out. Michael Eisner took over. He brought a guy named Jeff Katzenberg with him. And the two of them had worked at 20th Century Fox on a number of projects. And they did something that nobody had ever done on Roger Rabbit before. They brought in an outside producer. Nobody had ever done that at Disney before. They brought in an outside producer, a little known guy named Steve Spielberg. And so Steve Spielberg came in, and the minute Steve Spielberg came in, the whole thing changed. I mean, it just went into a higher gear. It went into a super atomic gear. And to show you the difference Steve Spielberg makes in Hollywood, in 1983, Roy Disney went to Warner Brothers and said, hey, we're making a live action animated movie, and we'd like to use Bugs Bunny in a cameo. He'll come out and he'll say, what's up, Doc? Bite a carrot, and he'll go, and he'll be on screen for 20 seconds. What do you think? And Warner Brothers looked at Roy Disney and says, get out of here. You're nuts. There's no way that Bugs Bunny is ever going to be in a Walt Disney movie. It's just not going to happen. Just forget it. Not going to happen. So 3 years later, Steve Spielberg walks into Warner Brothers, makes the same request. Hey, I want Bugs Bunny for a cameo. Of course.
We'd love to.
Well, yeah. What about Daffy? Take Daffy and Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner. And
ended up with the whole cast.
Yeah, get them all. Take Porky Pig. You got them all. And the only requirement was, and he got them. He had to pay for them. But what he had to pay for them was, I mean, in Hollywood terms, it was next to nothing. I mean, it was next to nothing in terms of what you pay for a good dinner. I mean, he had to pay next to nothing, except that Bugs Bunny, being a superstar, had a contract, and it was negotiated with agents, and it was a contract. And him being a co-equal superstar with Mickey Mouse, Bugs and Mickey had to be in every scene together.
Yep. And I think it was like Donald and Daffy too, right?
Like, yeah, Donald and Daffy, but that wasn't contractual. That's just the way it happened. The animators just thought it'd be funny to have the two ducks do it. But Bugs and Mickey had a contract, and they had to be in every scene together, and they had to have the exact same number of words of dialogue.
Right.
All right. So if you go back and watch the movie, you will see that they are in every scene together, and they have the same number of words of dialogue. You can count them, right?
Yeah.
And just by coincidence, I did a webinar a couple of weeks ago, and one of the guys on the webinar was a guy named Dave Spofford, and Dave was the guy who did all of the Warner's characters. He did the scene with Daffy and Donald, and he did the scene with Bugs and Mickey, and they gave him complete freedom, which is unusual in any movie, but especially in an animated movie, and especially in a Disney movie. He was able to do whatever he wanted. And so in the scene with the two ducks, he thought it would be funny if, a cannon came up.
Yeah,
and Donald shooting the cannon. Donald came up with a cannon and shot Daffy with a cannon. And then in the scene with Bugs and Mickey, the Warner Brothers people were tough to work with. When they saw what he had done with Daffy and how Daffy was just wackadoo,
right?
They said, you can't do that with Bugs. You cannot do that with Bugs. Bugs has got to be like Mickey. He's got to be,
Likeable.
very
Yeah.
likable, sedate. He can't be a wackadoodle. So when Mickey and Bugs are in that scene, if you'll notice, Bugs is just kind of laying there.
Right.
Well, there's something I'll tell you about. It's called gags in the margins. And animators know about this. They've been doing it as long as there's been animation. Film goes through a projector at 24 frames a second. And that's the optimum number that you need to give the illusion of motion. If you have less than that, it's jerky. If you have more than that, the human eye can't see. So 24 is what it has to be. And so animators have to draw 24 pictures, or cells, as they call them, because they were originally done as celluloid, 24 cells per second to match up with that. Okay. Now, animators learned early on that you could pretty well have fun with 6 of those 24 frames, and the human eye couldn't see it. So they would put little visual gags in cartoons, and they've been doing this since the beginning of cartoons. The only people who were ever able to see them were the projectionists in the movie theaters, and the projectionists would go through and look at them and sometimes cut them out because they were so funny. The one that that happened here was, the Warner Brothers people. First of all, they didn't want the Disney animators to use the 1940s Warner Brothers characters. They wanted them to use the 1980s Warner Brothers characters, and they're different. And the animators said, no, we want to use the 40s characters. And the Warner's people insisted they want to use the 80s characters. So Dave, I shouldn't use his name, but the animator who did it did 2 versions. He did one with the 40s characters, and he did one with the 80s characters. And the one they showed, the Warner Brothers people had the 80s characters, and the one they actually put in the movie was the 40s characters. And when the movie came out and the Warner Brothers people saw it, they went to Disney and complained, and this guy got fired for doing it. But anyway, these gags in the margins, 6-cell gags, and the movie's got a fair amount of them. The cartoons are just filled with them. But to show you what the relationship was between the Disney animators and Warner Brothers, when Mickey and Bugs are kind of going down,
following Eddie Valiant.
Yeah, and Eddie Valiant between them. In one 6-frame scene, you can quite clearly see Mickey giving the Bugs the finger. His little yellow finger comes. Yeah. So get your freeze frame going. The other interesting thing, when Eddie's parachute that turns out to be a tire, unravels.
Inflatable tire.
Yeah, and you see the parachute cords. If you freeze frame that, you'll see that the parachute cords are coming out, spell out Ringo is the walrus. Animation humor. Okay.
I was like, yeah, that's you're gonna have me going through it real slow on Disney Plus tonight. Yeah, no, the book, just as you mentioned, it's a really good book, really good read. There's some interesting things in there. I love how the characters have the word balloons whenever they talk.
Yeah, the characters in the book, because the characters in the book are from comic books and comic strips.
Comic strips.
Yeah, they are photographed. They're not drawn. They're photographed. And when they speak with word balloons. Yep. So if you want to talk to a cartoon character, you talk to him, and then his word balloon comes up, and you read him. And if he turns around, his word balloon turns around, and then you got to either learn how to read in reverse or go to the other side and read him straight on.
Brilliant.
Yeah. And when a cartoon gun fires, produces what they call a bang balloon, which says bang, and then that kind of turns brittle and falls on the ground. And if you get a gun and you want to see if it's a murder weapon, you shoot it, produces another bang balloon. You see if the two bang balloons match up, and there's your match. And when a tuned piano plays, the notes come out of the piano and they kind of drift away, and people will take those notes and cut them up into 8x10 sheets, and that's where sheet music comes from. So, I had a lot of fun playing with that. And early on, Disney wanted to, they love the word balloons. They love those. And they wanted to use word balloons in the cartoon instead of having the cartoon characters speak. But it became really, really obvious early on that if they did that, it became a silent movie.
Yeah.
The cartoon character would put up a word balloon and you'd have to read it, and then go on. This really slowed the action down. So they couldn't do it.
Better for the book. Yeah,
better for the book. And so in the movie, they wanted to have one homage to the book.
Mm-hmm.
So in a scene of Marvin Acme's funeral, where Marvin Acme is his coffin is being carried to his grave, and is being carried by Goofy and Bozo the Clown and a bunch of wackadoodle tunes, and they're carrying his coffin to his grave, and they start laughing because they're tunes, so they can't help it. They start laughing, and all of a sudden, everybody along the line starts laughing, and they walk by this cartoon character called Crazy Cat, and Crazy Cat was a character from the 30s, 40s. He was in cartoons and he was in comic books, comic strips, and he never spoke. And so they go by Crazy Cat, and Crazy Cat puts up a word balloon that says sob, S-O-B. And then it turns to tears and kind of comes down and gets his head and his shoulders all wet. Beautiful animation scene. But the movie came in at an hour and like 52, something like that. And they didn't know if this was going to be an adult movie or a children's movie. They really didn't know who was going to go see this.
Right.
Yeah, and a rule of thumb is that a children's movie can't be longer than 90 minutes.
Attention
and they
span.
had, an hour and 52. So they had to cut. They had to cut scenes. So they cut the Marvin Acme funeral scene. They cut a scene where Eddie Valiant goes into Toontown the first time. And when he goes into Toontown the first time, he encounters Judge Doom and the Weasels, and Jessica's with Judge Doom. And you kind of get the feeling that Jessica is in it with Doom.
Right.
And then that leads to the scene where he gets pigged. They put a pig's head on him and dump him back in LA. And he goes into his office, or his combination office where he lives, and he washes the pig head off in the shower. It's all really neat animation. He washes the pig head off in the shower, and then he comes out of the shower, and that's where they pick it up again in the movie. So all of that stuff got cut. And when they pick it up in the movie, Eddie Valiant is coming out of his bathroom wearing his sleeveless T-shirt and his necktie. And, if you look at it now, you think, why would a guy be in the bathroom wearing his T-shirt and his necktie?
His tie, yeah. It was kind of odd in the movie, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see how that could kind of tie better together, though.
Yeah. A lot of that stuff was reinserted on the, I think they did a director's cut of the movie, and some of those scenes were reinserted.
It was like the DVD release.
Yeah, the DVD release, and they weren't totally animated, so you gotta kind of use your imagination again.
Right. Yeah, I like the doppelgangers too. I thought it was really interesting. And then one of the things I really noticed reading the book, and you see it in the movie as well, is that the Toons were kind of discriminated against in a way. Even the term Toon was kind of, how he'd utter it. This is like Toons.
Well, that's one of the Steve Spielberg had read the book when it came out, and Bob Zemeckis, who directed the movie, had been offered the movie by Disney in 82 or 83.
Mm-hmm.
But he really didn't think that Disney had the horsepower to do it then, and he was right. So, he went off and did other little known projects like Back to the Future and Forrest Gump. And
yeah. What happened with those?
Yeah, that you never heard of. But when Steve and Bob C got back involved in it, they both understood the kind of discrimination that I was looking at here, and that the racial inharmonies about how tunes and humans have this relationship, and tunes aren't better than humans or worse; they're just different. And the whole premise of the movie, especially, is, hey, why can't we just all get along?
Civil rights movement.
Yeah. So this is a civil rights movie,
yeah.
And there's the undercurrent. It's an undercurrent in the movie. It's more obvious, I think, in the book. But I've since written 2 other books, and it's still there. I mean, humans and tunes still aren't getting along.
Yeah. I think in your first book, they were protesting. The humans were protesting that the tunes were moving into the town
absolutely.
and stuff.
Absolutely.
And then I noticed too, talking about some of the characters and stuff like Judge Doom, there's so many similarities to Judge Doom and Hitler, and how Hitler wanted the Autobahn, Judge Doom wanted the freeway. They were trying to exterminate, their own. But
well, that red line, there really was a red line in L.A. I mean, we didn't make that up. There really was, and the whole freeway thing. We didn't make that up either, And when I think it was, who was it? Eddie says, "Freeways? What kind of a stupid idea is that?"
It's something like that's never going to work.
That's never going to work.
Have you ever noticed? Like, I don't know if maybe I just look too deep. My wife and I tend to look her worse than me, but we tend to look really deep into things with movies. And I noticed the color green, is usually associated with like greed, money. Here, green symbolized like the color of the dip that the tunes had. The spirits, if you see when the weasels passed away, they were green when they were kind of floating off. And then,
it's interesting to me because people read into what I write a lot of stuff that I'm not aware that I consciously put there.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, when you say that, it's right. Green is kind of the color of death in the movie. And
even Judge Doom laying there, the goop around him was green.
Yep. Yeah, it's green. And when you think about that, you think, well, I didn't intentionally do it, but I did it. Yeah. And so there must, somewhere in the back there, it must be it's my least favorite color. So there you go. There it is. What's the color of death? Well, it's green. It's lime green. And I gotta. It's interesting that you mentioned that. You'll know exactly why later. I just finished a new novel called Jessica Rabbit: Serious Business, with serious spelled with an X, Xerious, and it's a Jessica Rabbit novel, and it's a Jessica Rabbit origin story. It shows you where Jessica, how she grew up, how she became Jessica Rabbit, how she met Roger, and where Toontown came from.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, it's a blow away. It's just incredible.
Oh, when are you looking at releasing that one?
I'm still talking to publishers about it, trying to figure that out. And I'm not sure that I want to release a book during the pandemic when there aren't bookstores that people can go into and buy that. I don't know. My guess would be next year.
Yeah.
But there's a motif running through that, which I can't tell you about.
Yeah.
But it's green. And it's death. And, there it is again.
So I wasn't looking too deep into it.
No.
That's good.
So I don't want to talk to you too much because you're going to tell me all kinds. It's like talking to my psychiatrist. You can ask me how I felt about my mother next, and oh, geez.
I've got pages here of my theories for it. No, I Judge Doom. I mean, it's crazy to do research on it and see that like Tim Curry was one of the ones who originally auditioned for it, but he was deemed too creepy. But I'm like, my God, if Christopher Lloyd wasn't creepy enough as a kid, well, he wouldn't blink or just little things, the light hitting his glasses.
He kept his eyes open, and it actually gave him problems because he wouldn't blink.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, he was just a consummate actor, and he wouldn't blink because that was the character, and it gave him problems. His eyes dried out. He always had his special drops and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
But of all the people that could have played Judge Doom, and Judge Doom is a terrifying creation, the spookiest creation I've ever done. And, people have told me that Judge Doom and his spinning eyes traumatized them as children.
Oh, then they were like daggers at the end.
Yeah, and they were daggers, and they were traumatized by this.
When he killed Bambi's mom.
Yeah, that's right.
How cruel can you be?
Yeah, that's right. And when you meet Chris Lloyd, he is the nicest guy. He's just the nicest guy. I mean, he's Reverend Jim from Taxi. He's just the nicest guy.
We met him at a Comic-Con probably about 3 or 4 years ago, and we did like a photo shoot at the DeLorean. And by the way, we got him to sign one of the Funko Pops, a Judge Doom Funko Pop, which is a pride and joy of ours. But they were only allowing 3 people to take a photo. So one of my daughters was standing over on the side, and because she hadn't really watched it, but she still wanted to be over there. And he even told the people running it, he's like, no, that we're going to allow the whole family to come over here. And he's just the nicest guy in the world with us.
Nice guy.
Yeah, and it's just crazy that he was, especially coming off of Back to the Future, and then he is just this terrifying character. But that always kind of made me scratch my head. I'm like, if Tim Curry was deemed too creepy, what in the world were they going to do with him if Christopher Lloyd looked like that?
Yeah, people ask me if I have any regrets about the movie, and I only have one, and the only regret I have is that Bob Hoskins was the consummate actor. I mean, he was unbelievable. I had my doubts when they said, "Hey, Hoskins is coming in to read for this," because I said, the guy's British, and I seen The Long Good Friday and Mona Lisa, and incredible actor, but British and Cockney British. How's he gonna convince people that he's the consummate LA private eye? But he came in and read in a perfect American accent, and was standing there in a empty room and talking to the rabbit, and he convinced you that the rabbit was real, that the rabbit was there.
Yep.
And my only regret in the movie is that Bob Hoskins made what he did look so easy that they didn't even nominate him for an Academy Award. And he should have won the Academy Award hands down for that role. I mean, there were times when he was in an empty room making up Toontown in his head and convincing you that it was real. He had to remember where the rabbit's eyes were.
Eyesight.
If his eye line was off, it would ruin the you'd have disbelief. If you watch the movie when he's handcuffed to the rabbit, those handcuffs are on springs.
That was on Prop Culture.
Yeah,
I think it's on Disney Plus. Yeah.
So when he is moving his hand, he's got to remember how to move his hand, and also how to move his hands so that he moves the rabbit's hand.
Yeah.
And when he picks up the rabbit by the ears, he's got to remember to pick the rabbit up this way and not this way, because if he picks the rabbit up this way, they have to animate between his fingers, and it adds $100,000 a minute to the cost.
That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, and he's a great guy. Gone too soon. I miss him terribly. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny because when you read the list of the people that, Harrison Ford, Bill Murray, Eddie Murphy, all these people that were in consideration for it, I couldn't imagine anybody other than him playing that role. Um, yeah, the movie, huge success. I think it was the number two highest grossing movie in 1988 behind Rain Man, but Rain Man debuted in like December. So those numbers kind of carried over. But
Yeah.
at the time, it was the 20th highest grossing film of all time, 329 million. It was funny because
It's up over $1 billion now.
wow. Yeah, with DVDs and VHS release was later that year. It was right around Christmas time, so that was perfect timing. But one of the things, outside of the cartoon spin that you mentioned at Disney, the Happy Meal toys, the video game, one thing that I thought was really brilliant as we kind of put a bow on the Roger Rabbit piece of this is the short films that came out. Tummy Trouble, because that came out a year after in June of '89. And what those short films were was they would play before the actual movie that you paid to go see. So, for example, Tummy Trouble was Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. A year later, Roger Rabbit or Roller Coaster Rabbit, that one played before Dick Tracy in June of '90. And then they had a couple of years there where it was a Trail Mix-Up, which I like that one. That was in '93, and that was from not as good a movie as the other two, A Far Off Place. That was the elephant movie.
Yeah, it was interesting. The Dick Tracy one was interesting because it was pretty well proven that having a Roger Rabbit cartoon in front of a movie increased the gross significantly because people would come to the movie to see the cartoon.
Well, and for VHS sales as well, it keeps it relevant.
Yeah, and so they wanted to put Roller Coaster in front of Dick Tracy, but Warren Beatty said no because Warren Beatty doesn't like cartoons. There's another reason not to like Warren Beatty, right? But finally they convinced him that it would aid the gross of his movie, so he finally relented.
I found it crazy because every time I watch Roger Rabbit, the weasels kind of remind me of like the Dick Tracy villains. So to see that one was one of the openers. And cool thing is all three of those are on Disney Plus right now. Wasn't there something, I believe it was Roller Coaster Rabbit, where like your name wasn't credited?
The first one. The first one. It's contractual. I mean, I have to be credited on all of the Roger Rabbit movies and cartoons. And so my wife and I, we had gone down to Disneyland where they were, Disney World, where they were making the cartoons, and out to California to see the cartoons being made, but we'd never seen it all put together.
Right.
So we went to see the movie, and we watched the cartoon, and the credits are rolling, and my credit wasn't there. And it's contractual. It has to be there. So, I said, we got to stay and see it again. I must have missed it. So we stayed through the whole movie and watched the cartoon again, and it wasn't there. So, of course, the first call I make is to my lawyer. And so my lawyer calls Michael Eisner, and he said, Mr. Wolf went to the movies last night and saw Tummy Trouble, and his credit is not on screen. And you'll be hearing from me soon. And the next day, this FedEx truck pulled up. Actually, I think it might have been a Brinks truck. I don't know, but it deposited an obscene amount of money on my front door and said, "We hope that this makes you feel better." And I would have rather had the credit, but the money was nice. But if you look at
truck pulling up, it's not a bad thing either.
yeah. And if you look at the second one, all right, at the second one, Roller Coaster, my credit comes up, and it is huge.
Yeah.
It's huge, and it stays up there. It stays up there, and it stays up there, and it stays up there so long that even my mother and my aunts were getting embarrassed that my credit was up there for so long. But that was their little way of saying sorry, Yeah.
It's kind of like you said, the thing about the Roger Rabbit or the Bugs Bunny films, how that somebody was in trouble, hot water for that. I'm sure somebody was the same way for the
Well,
credit.
yeah, and whoever put the credits together just didn't know,
Yeah.
and nobody knew. But I'll tell you my favorite story. Um, the Roger Rabbit movie premiered at Radio City Music Hall, and in New York, so that I didn't have to go to the East Coast. I could just drive up from Boston and see it. So, my wife and I went, and I was sitting up in the first balcony with all the VIPs, right? And I mean, this movie had been going on from 85 to 88. And, I'd seen most of it, but I'd never seen it all put together. And I had also never seen my credit at the end, because, that was the last thing that they did. So, I'm sitting up there in the balcony with the VIPs, and I'm going to watch my movie all the way through for the first time on a big screen in Radio City Music Hall. I'm going to see my credit, which I never thought I would see, on the big screen in Radio City Music Hall. And on my right, I've got Kathleen Turner sitting next to me, who is the voice of Jessica Rabbit.
Right.
And also the most gorgeous woman I've ever met in my life. And on my other side, I've got Amy Irving, who was Steven Spielberg's wife, who is like the second most gorgeous woman I've ever seen in my life. And she was the singing voice of Jessica Rabbit. Yep. Jessica had two voices in the movie. And I'm sitting there between the two most beautiful women I've ever seen in my life. And I'm going to see my movie and my credit. And I'm thinking, life doesn't get any better than this. And then, by golly, life got better, because Kathleen put her hand on my knee, and she leaned over and she whispered to me, she says, "Gary, are you excited?" And I said, "Kathleen, you have no idea."
That's awesome too, especially considering all those rejection letters you had received. Talking about hundreds.
Well, yeah, and when I wrote the sequel novel, we had 10 publishers bidding on the rights to publish the sequel novel. All 10 of them had rejected the first novel once. 3 of them had rejected the first novel twice, and one lucky devil had rejected the first novel 3 times. So, yeah.
Wow.
Never give up. That's
exactly. It's a perfect story for that. So throughout this whole journey, what have you learned about yourself? Something you've learned about yourself through this whole thing?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, of course, I just said never give up. But what I've learned about myself in my own creative process is that it's always there, and it's always working, and it's always inside you. And sometimes after I finish a book, I say, "Geez, I have no idea what I'm going to do next. I think I'm done. I'll never have another original idea." And then I'll be doing something, or I'll be seeing something, or talking to somebody, and all of a sudden I'll get an idea. And it's just a blazingly incredible idea. And I've learned to trust the fact that those will always be there.
Yeah.
And I think that the thing that I've learned is that you have to facilitate the process to make that happen. You have to do things that make it easier for your ideas to come to the surface. And for me, I was running. I was a serious marathoner. I've done 38 marathons. This time 247. And when I had to stop running because of my knees, bad knees, after like 30 years, I continued to walk, but I started doing yoga. I do a lot of yoga every day. I meditate. I started meditating when I was still running. And those are the kinds of things that facilitate your mental process, at least my mental process. Kind of puts you into a different space. And I also love to experience weird things, like go to unusual museums. We were driving across country and I stopped off someplace in Minnesota to look at the world's biggest ball of string. Got to do it, right?
Yeah.
And, just open yourself up to new experiences, because that's where creative ideas come from.
Yeah.
If you just sit at home in your room, in your lonely little house all day for the past 8 months.
I was going to say, yeah.
My next book is probably going to be about rearranging the shelves in the kitchen. I don't know. Spices. I don't know.
Upkeeping a house for 8 months.
There you go.
Well, what do you want to be known for 50 years from now when people are still talking about you and Roger Rabbit?
Roger Rabbit is it for me. When I die, if it says on my tombstone, "Here lies Gary K. Wolfe, he created Roger Rabbit at Toontown," that'll be enough.
Yeah.
Roger's a cultural icon. Jessica's a cultural icon.
That's like they both are.
I cannot tell you, every day, every single day, I get an email, a text, something, a message on Facebook of some young woman who is cosplaying Jessica.
Wow.
And that's a character. She's like 35 years old. She's actually 40 years old if you count the book.
Mm-hmm.
And for a character to exist for that length of time and still be popular and still be recognized, what more could you want?
Yeah, like you said, it's been, if you count the book, you're looking at 40 years and it still holds up well. The book still reads very well. I mean, the movie, you could compare that to anything that's coming out now, and it stood the test of time. Well, before we get going, one last question for you. I heard you have a story about an A2 jacket.
Yeah, I do.
The Air Force.
It's a slightly long story, but I'm gonna try and compress it. When my wife knows what kind of presents to get me, she just knows, right?
Okay.
So one Christmas, for a present, she arranged for me the next World Series, the next summer's World Series, for me to go to the Yogi Berra Museum in New Jersey and watch the 5th game of the World Series in Yogi Berra's screening room in his museum with Yogi Berra. Okay.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So I did this, and it turned out to be the Chicago White Sox, and I'm a Chicago boy, so yeah, it was great. I think we were playing the Texas Rangers.
Yeah, it's like mid 2000s.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so I was there. It was a charity deal. There were probably, 50 people there.
Mm-hmm.
It was a great affair. But the game went into extra innings. And so like the 10th inning, people started leaving. Who's going to leave? Yogi Berra. And I'm sitting next to Yogi Berra, right?
Yeah.
Yogi. So I'm saying, geez, Yogi Berra's right here, and people are leaving. And the game went like 15 innings. And by the 15th inning, everybody had gone except me and Yogi. And Yogi was asleep with his head on my shoulder, right? So, Yogi's famous saying, "It ain't over till it's over." So I said, "Hey, Yogi," I said, "Wake up." I said, "It's over." And he looked at me and says, "No, it ain't." So, he signed a baseball for me. I was walking on clouds. Went back to my hotel in New Jersey, left the next day. Now, when I was in Vietnam, I was an air commando in Vietnam, and we were kind of cowboys. We sort of made our own uniforms. So we wore the Australian slouch hats, and we had pistol belts that we had custom made in Hong Kong for quick draw. And we were cowboys, but we wore A2 flight jackets and leather A2 flight jackets, and I still had mine. I was so overwhelmed by that experience with Yogi that I checked out of the hotel, got back to Massachusetts, back to Boston where I live, and I realized I'd left my A2 in the closet.
Oh, no.
At the hotel. So I called the hotel, said, "Hey, it was in this room." He said, "Oh, well, nobody's been in that room." He went in, it's gone. So I said, "All right, I am going to check every A2 that comes up for sale on eBay for the next year. Every one I'm going to check because somebody's going to sell that on eBay. I never got it back. That's not the story. All right. So it was the last day that I was looking, the very last day. And this A2 comes up, and it was a horsehide A2 World War II vintage. And it was obvious I wasn't going to get my A2. So I said, well, I'm going to get myself a vintage World War II A2. Mm-hmm. And it was in tough shape. And they said, on the listing, tough shape. So I got it, and it came in a box, and I opened it up, and the thing just had this really weird smell the high heavens, and it was just filthy dirty. And my wife looked at it, and she said, "Did you buy that?" I said, "Yeah." She says, "I hope you didn't pay a lot of money for it." I said, "Oh, no, it wasn't much at all." And it really wasn't. So I found this woman, Willow Rose, who restores flight jackets. That's her business.
Okay.
So I sent this flight jacket to her, and I said, "Hey, Willow, can you restore this A2 for me?" And she said, "Oh, sure." And I said, "Now I got to ask you a question." I said, why is it so dirty? I said, "Why does it smell?" And she said, it smells from machine gun lubricating oil. The guy who had this, because of the wear pattern on the jacket, was a tail gunner on a B-17. And it smells from the machine gun lubricating oil.
Right.
I said, "Why is it so dirty?" And she says, "Oh, that's gunpowder." And I said, "Jesus, I'm not macho enough to wear this jacket." So she started restoring it, and it had the leather name tag on it, although you couldn't read what the name tag said because it was so filthy dirty. And so she restored it, and she said, "I cleaned off the leather name tag." She said, "Did you say you bought this on eBay?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "Well, the name tag says Wolf." I said, "Really?"
Wow.
She said, "Yeah." And then she kept going on it, and it had the serial number stamped inside. And she was able to resurrect the serial number. She gave me the serial number. I checked the serial number. It was my father's jacket.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Yeah, right here.
How crazy of a story is that? Oh my gosh.
There you go. There you go.
Wow.
You see it?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, Wolf right there.
Yeah. And then got the whole thing going. Yeah. And
wow, you talk about one in a million.
Yeah, and like me, he never talked about it.
Yeah.
He never talked about his time in the service. So I never knew he had a flight jacket. I'm not sure I ever really knew what he did.
Yeah.
That was it. Yeah.
Wow. That is crazy.
Good story, huh?
That is an amazing, I thought, I was like, he's got an A2 story to tell me. This is going to be pretty cool. But I had no idea it was that. Wow. That is
mystical.
Yeah. So that's a perfect way, I think, to end this with a good story like that.
And I got to ask you, Air Force guy, all right?
Yep.
I was an Air Force guy, and I always thought the Air Force guys needed like a better slogan. Like the Marines got Semper Fi, and the Army's got Hoorah, and the Navy's got Anchors Aweigh, and what have we got? Off you go.
Fly, fight, win. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we got to work on that. Okay.
Yeah.
We need a better. Like Zoom, right?
Zoom. Well, that's taking a whole nother meaning with our virtual technology.
Yeah. Or to infinity and beyond, but that's been used too. So
there you go.
Put the word out. We got to work on that.
We'll do. Well, I'll tell them. I'll say I got it from you. That we need to work on this. No, well, if somebody wants to get in contact with you, find out more about you.
Go to my website, www.garywolf.com, and you can get in touch with me there. You can buy my books. They just came out with a really nice audio recording of my first book, Who Censored Roger Rabbit. Really nice. And you can learn all there is to know about me, which is probably more than you'd ever want to know. So www.garywolf.com.
GaryWolf.com. Okay.
Yeah, and you can email me there, and I answer all my emails. I mean, I spend an hour a day answering all my emails personally. Do that.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Sir, I appreciate you answering my email or my message I sent you and making this happen here today. This was super cool experience for me. Like I said, one of my favorite movies of all time, Roger Rabbit. So thank you, sir, for taking some time. And folks, like I said, make sure you check us out on Facebook at The Shadows Podcast, and then on Instagram as well, _shadows_podcast. That's all the time we have. Thank you for tuning in.